Hi there, I am your host, Kulula Mutwa, and this is Property Market Moves. With me today, I am sitting with Anelisa Keke. Hi.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm all right, thanks.
Yeah. Before we go into it, walk me briefly through who is Anelisa? What did you study? And yeah.
Thanks so much for having me, and hello to all of your listeners. So how I started and where I come from, I'm from East London originally,
Okay.
the Eastern Cape. I studied my undergrad at UCT, so I have a law degree.
Okay. Law degree.
Yes.
Okay.
So I have an LLB, qualified attorney, and then I worked for a professional services company for about 5.5 years,
Okay.
focusing on tax and executive pay consulting. So then I was kind of approached for a new position at the time at my most previous employer, which is a major real estate investment trust, to be their first head of ESG. And then later on, I became their first chief sustainability officer. Did that for about 4.5 years. And then I decided it was time for a career break. So I decided to travel locally and internationally and just rest and relax and reconnect with family, friends. And then I started getting into the consulting side of things around August last year, which is what I'm still doing now.
Wow. And what does Chief Sustainability Officer entail? I mean, what's in that job?
Look, I think it'll depend on the mandate you've been given by the organization. But ideally, it should be a very senior role that is focused on taking fairly abstract principles of sustainability, right? Whether that is environmental kind of sustainability and focusing on making your buildings more energy and water efficient, etc., or it's focusing on the social side, so focusing on impact-based, interventions. So instead of focusing purely on BEE, for example, and BEE certainly has its place, but asking yourself through these BEE initiatives, how many jobs are being created? How many actual beneficiaries are there as a result of this spend, right? Instead of just ticking a box and walking away. And then, of course, from the governance side, just making sure that the organization is adhering to market best practice regarding good governance, ethical governance, and incorporating ESG into your existing corporate structures. So your chief sustainability officer should be taking all of those different bits and pieces and should be doing their best to incorporate or helping the executive team and the board incorporate them into capital allocation decisions. So if, for example, your company is thinking about buying a property out in, Romania, for argument's sake, ESG consideration should be part of that decision, as opposed to ESG is relegated to, a small portion of the company, a small portion of the strategy, whilst the main issues that the company must deal with are almost dealt with separately. So ultimately, a chief sustainability officer should spend every day trying to work towards integrating ESG into day-to-day business and investment decision-making.
What attracted you to this space?
It's interesting. I mean, so the work I was doing before at the consulting firm was focused on executive compensation, including kind of target setting and setting remuneration incentive targets for executives to meet, right? So you meet your targets, you get a certain payout. And what I saw at that time was that increasingly ESG kind of targets were being incorporated into pay considerations. So instead of just compensating your executives for financial performance, more and more companies were starting to compensate them for meeting certain ESG goals or targets. And I wanted to learn a bit more. So when the opportunity came, I thought, well, here's an interesting opportunity. I'm not sure what it will entail, but let's see where this goes, given the fact that clearly it's becoming a greater and greater focus area for corporates.
Wow. And how has that shaped? Because you have a passion for it. How are you seeing it evolve now from, to where we are from where you started, and how, looking into the future?
Look, I think it has evolved a lot in terms of, to paint a picture, I think in the 2010s, sustainability was a fairly fluffy term. And I think in many ways, and many companies are still treating it as a very fluffy, nonsensical concept, right?
Yeah.
So it's useful for a good marketing campaign.
Yeah.
You know those little eco triangle logos. Yeah, just slap that on the product and Bob's your uncle. And what is good is that in the past 5 years or so, definitely seen a shift towards having far more targeted interventions that have real world impact and that actually have some sort of business rationale.
Okay.
And I think in the South African market, that is also driven by the socioeconomic environment. We've had years of crippling load shedding. And, as those business continuity related issues start affecting property owners, they've come to realize, look, sustainability interventions make good business sense.
Yeah.
If I've got a portfolio in Sandton, which is experiencing frequent water interruptions for days at a time, then it makes sense for me to then start integrating alternative backup water solutions, making the building more water efficient, etc.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And even from the social side, unfortunately, we saw the fallout from the 2021 civil unrest. And that for me illustrates the importance of the S in ESG.
Sure.
You can't leave communities out of the discussion. You can't make it a surface level, superficial kind of outreach initiative. It has to have real world impact. Because when the chips are down and there's that level of civil unrest, is your community going to destroy your property, or are they going to protect your property?
Yeah.
That's really how you know whether or not your S in ESG is strong enough, in my view.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we've come from. As for where we're going, look, I think there's a lot of regulation in our future. So at the end of this year, and public service announcement, by the way, listeners, the energy performance certificates requirements from the SANS standards will become law. So effective, well, they're already law, but you will then be required to display your energy performance certificate if you own a building within one of the prescribed building classes. So a lot of offices, for example, fall within those categories. And interestingly, maybe this needs to be updated a bit, but SANEDI, which is the government organization responsible for kind of regulating those energy performance certificates, I believe they've indicated there are a lot of buildings that have not been registered, that do not have energy performance certificates, that are not compliant.
Sure.
So any listener out there that has got a significant stock of offices or other buildings that might fall within those requirements, you have got approximately 11 months left.
Oh my gosh, by end of 2025.
By the end of 2025, bearing in mind, it was moved because initially it was the end of 2022. It was moved 3 years. Now we're at the end of the 3 years. And I think what's important is that is the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
That is the tip of the iceberg. Some of the regulations that are coming down the line, I think, are really going to clearly differentiate between the companies that are saying the right things on ESG but not doing anything, and the companies that are actually doing the right thing from an ESG perspective and trying to future-proof their businesses. You will see that when it comes to the ability of each of those businesses to actually meet these increasingly demanding regulatory requirements.
Sure. What role is the property sector playing, contributing towards climate resilience and sustainability?
Look, I think the property sector has got a massive role to play. And it is unfortunate, in my view, that, up until the past few years, the focus has been on, resource extraction and mining companies and their role from an ESG perspective. But to give you an idea, 39% of global carbon emissions are attributable to the built environment.
39%?
Yes.
Sure.
And about 30% of global biodiversity loss is attributable to the built environment. If we don't get it right at a property level, we cannot get anything right from a climate perspective. So property companies have a vital role to play. And what's interesting in my new kind of phase of my career is I'm not only talking to landlords, but also talking to tenants. Yes. And if you think about it, even the most well-resourced multinational tenants are ultimately tenants. And if the landlord that is responsible for the building doesn't know anything about sustainability, doesn't feel that it's their problem, doesn't want to cooperate, then those tenants themselves struggle to meet their own ESG-related goals.
Okay.
So you're seeing more and more of that, where you have some of the national retailers who've got very well-documented ESG strategies in place, very stretching ESG targets. They want to implement those principles at a store level or a branch level. And what you find is that when you're talking to them, a lot of them say, the landlords, when we approach them and ask them for cooperation, they refuse to cooperate. So I think, unfortunately, there's still very much a tendency, in my view, in the property sector to treat property management and the role of a landlord as what it was perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. I provide you with basic amenities, you pay rent, leave me alone. Not realizing that if you want to remain competitive in this market and you want to get those kind of very blue chip, high quality tenants, you have to show that you are prepared to participate in this ESG journey.
So are we seeing more and more tenants that will, as part of their requirements, this compliance with ESG in the buildings, and that could in the future then affect the vacancy rates that we see across the different asset classes?
Quite right. And the initial asset class that probably has the greatest push in this regard is actually offices.
Okay.
Especially if you are vying for leases from global or multinational office tenants who want to have a presence in South Africa, because they have, once again, they have their own corporate ESG related targets to meet. Some of them will come to you and say, before we can sign on the dotted line, you need to commit that this building is going to have certain sustainability related features. Some of them will say this building has to have some kind of acceptable green rating. So because they also want that layer of verification. So they want to make sure that there is an independent third party that is confirming that the building is as green as the landlord says it is, as opposed to the landlord just saying, oh, it's green. Yeah, it's green. Yeah. And then you say, okay, but what aspect of it is green, right? Because green is a term that's thrown around a lot, but it's a very nuanced term. Does that mean it has renewables? Is it energy efficient? Does it have waste management and recycling practices in place? You have to be quite specific. And so I think a lot of landlords are still in the space where they say, oh, you want it green? No, it's green, 100%. Don't worry about that thing. And ultimately, we have to be a lot more intentional and a lot more specific about what aspect of the building is green, whether or not that can be proven in order to attract those types of tenants.
And I mean, you've mentioned then the contribution that the built environment has, the 39%. How can the industry contribute towards that reduction? What initiatives, what interventions can the industry do to reduce those kinds of contributions?
Look, I think the good news is that through local organizations, the SA REIT Association has recently published a sustainability disclosure guidance document, which I was a material contributor towards. There's also plenty of international guidance, such as from the World Green Building Council. Closer to home, we also have the Green Building Council of South Africa. There's plenty of guidance on the types of initiatives that companies can introduce. The one that is perhaps the most well-known is obviously renewable energy. So on-site solar PV, usually focused on rooftop solar PV installations. But if you think about it, not all rooftops are designed to bear the weight of solar panels.
Sure.
And some rooftops, especially in an office environment, some rooftops are quite limited in size. Even for the rooftops that have quite a bit of space, you might find that some areas are in a shaded spot, and therefore it's not a case of the entire surface area can actually viably support solar panels. So on top of renewable energy, it is absolutely vital that landlords consider the resource efficiency of the building. Is the building using as little energy as possible?
Okay.
So you maximize the energy efficiency of the building.
Yeah.
And then you consider renewables.
Okay.
You maximize the water efficiency of the building. So for example, installing little aerator taps. Yeah. It's so funny. The more you learn about sustainability, the more you realize how, there's nothing as bizarre in fiction as what you might find in fact. Really. I mean, some of the stuff, I'd write a book, but I don't think anyone would ever believe it. Little aerator taps. So you buy these little things, you fit them on your tap. They take your water that's coming out of the tap per minute from about 9 liters a minute to about 1.5 liters a minute.
Really?
Yes. And every 6 months, you take it out, you clean it with a little toothbrush, then you screw it back in. It's cheap.
Wow.
And it's cheap. You get that done within you can fit them in manually. You don't need to have 6 degrees from UCT to do it. You fit them in manually and immediately you're making a saving in your common area bathrooms. So I think for landlords, it's about, think about getting the basics right. Just get the basics right, guys. You don't have to, and this is the trap I think a lot of landlords fall into when they're starting the journey. Yeah. They think that whatever it is they're trying to do has to have the most sophisticated, cutting-edge, world-class initiative there is out there.
Yeah.
They want the most sophisticated kind of rainwater reticulation system, which is going to cost X million rand. And yes, those things are necessary, but what about the basics? Get the basics right, and then move from there. So I think there's a lot that landlords can do in this regard, but so much of it as well is about institutional will.
Yeah.
Do they want to start the journey? Because I can tell you all about the great initiatives in the sustainability space, how they can save your electricity costs. We know that electricity costs and the increases in costs are outstripping inflation. That's a publicly available data point. Water is also very expensive, especially in nodes such as Gauteng. Waste. I mean, I think there was a study released a couple of years ago that said that a lot of landfills in major metros are going to reach end of life, probably within the next year or so.
Sure.
And there's not enough there's not enough new landfill spaces to take up the rest of that load. So now landlords have to think, but what am I going to do with my waste management post 2026?
That is like tomorrow.
Yes. So these things, you are very much responding to a need. But once again, if a landlord or the company doesn't feel that ESG is important, then it'll just lag behind. And then unfortunately, like so many other things in life, they will start taking it seriously when the issue is already here.
And I mean, sure. So my next question was, the sustainable practices and the impact in the communities, right? That these buildings are around.
Yes.
And when you're talking about that, I mean, that's one of them. So what do we do with all of this waste?
Look, I think there are several waste management companies who can actually, so you basically outsource your waste management on site. Instead of relying purely on the municipality, you start getting a private waste service contractor on site. What they do, interestingly, is they actually set up a designated area somewhere in your basement, somewhere discreet, where they get all of the waste from within the building. And then they will have 1 or 2 people stationed there whose job it is to sort between recyclable waste and non-recyclable waste. So it is quite an intensive operation, and you can get them based on that system to start recycling your waste. But like so many other things in sustainability, this depends on responsible behavior from occupants and from the landlords. Because think about it, your waste will also depend on whether or not, and I'm sure you've seen these kinds of bins somewhere, between wet waste and dry waste, or there'll be a bin for plastic, for cans, etc. if everyone is using that system consistently, then that entire recycling process should go fairly smoothly, actually, right? Because then it is very clear which aspects of your waste are recyclable and which aspects are not recyclable.
Sure.
And the recyclable ones, you don't want them to get contaminated in any way. But unfortunately, if people don't have that awareness, they just don't care. I've seen many times in my life where you have all these fancy, and usually the most egregious ones are the ones where they're like color coded, and you can tell that the company spent money kind of getting the things designed in a very visually appealing way. And you see even educated people with big degrees,
Just throw
it all into one bin because they couldn't be bothered. These are educated people, so there's no excuse. So it's about that. It's about also understanding that when you are implementing these sustainability practices, you have to integrate some element of change management and awareness. And you have to take people on the journey with you. Because ultimately then, unfortunately, you will never be able to then get the full benefits that you should be getting from that initiative. Even the taps, the little aerator taps I explained. It is not going to help if your occupants, when they use the bathroom, they don't even bother to close the tap properly if it's a manual tap. You just leave it running and walk out.
My goodness.
So these are the things we have to get right.
And I mean, in every conversation that we're having now, we know that there's, AI, there's new technologies, and I mean, you've spoken about these brilliant, and I'm imagining that even in our homes, right?
Yes.
It could actually help to have a reduction in the water that we actually use. What other technologies can we look to? I mean, are there technologies that are coming in?
Yes.
And possibly in the future that will change how sustainability is viewed?
Look, I think some of the most exciting technology at a building level is what's called smart building technology, whereby a lot of the basic functions of the buildings are automated.
Okay.
Right. So, for example, if you, for example, have a leak in the building, it's very difficult to detect leaks and to detect where they are, right? All you usually see is that you went from using 1 megaliter of water per month to, and you've gone up to 2. And there's no explanation, right? But with that kind of technology, it would be much easier then to detect when exactly there is a spike in water consumption over a 24-hour cycle, or whether or not the building, despite its occupancy levels, so let's say it's empty after 7 p.m., it's an office, right? And yet somehow
there's still consumption.
Yes. And though that's the kind of technology that I think will definitely help this process. And also I think the reporting burden. Sustainability reporting is becoming, forgive the Greek mythology reference, but it's like a many-headed hydra. You cut off one head and then 2 sprout up in its place. And even with that one, I think in the legend, Hercules kills it with fire, but he still ends up getting poisoned by the blood of the hydra and dies anyway. And that's a good analogy, because even when you think that you've got sustainability reporting under control, it still manages to get you in the end. So why I'm bringing that up, sustainability reporting is a very manual process. It's spreadsheets.com. You just get a zillion spreadsheets. The moment you get spreadsheets, you get finger errors, you get human error, right? And you want your data to be accurate and reliable, and you want it to be real time, ideally, right? You want to see what's going on in the building right now. So the kinds of technologies that are coming out, and there are quite a few service providers emerging in the market at the moment, that actually allow you to monitor different aspects of your building's sustainability performance. And gather and aggregate that data so that it is easier for you to draw insights from it and take preventative actions or remedial actions if necessary as a result. Because otherwise, like I mentioned, it is spreadsheet.com. And as someone who has gone through 2 limited assurance exercises, spreadsheets.com will only get you so far. So that kind of element of technology and automation will also be very important.
And I know we've touched on this when we were talking about, the tenants now, looking for more sustainable, buildings when they're looking for space. Are we seeing sustainability as one of the key factors that buyers and tenants are looking for? Is it still a secondary decision?
I do think that, and except for a few kind of global tenants, it is still a secondary considerations for a lot of tenants, because you know what else you find, and these are the evils of silos within or corporations. You find that the tenants kind of company or holding company has a sustainability strategy, right? The leasing team that is actually negotiating the lease doesn't know anything about that thing.
How?
Silos are evil. So what happens is, and this has become that's when it becomes chicken and egg, because then the parties that are actually in the negotiation and negotiating the terms of the lease, the ones who represent the tenants some of them don't even know that the tenant has a group level sustainability related target that must be incorporated into its leases. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then the landlords turn around and say, well, our tenants aren't asking us for this information, so why does this matter? Buyers, unfortunately, I don't think we're at the place where buyers are specifically targeting sustainable buildings. In the next 5 years, though, I do think that's going to change. And why I'm saying that? If not for the rationale of, they want to do the right thing, certainly to take into account climate-related risks. If that building has received some sort of, or is in an area that has suffered from, damage from an extreme climate event, there was a massive storm, or there was a flooding or hail damage, etc., your insurers are going to note that. And over time, I do think your buyers are going to note that as well.
Sure.
And I think that will start slowly but surely creeping into the potential sales price. Certainly, I think, interestingly, the social risks in terms of whether or not your property is located close to an informal settlement where there's a lot of civil unrest and service delivery protests, that kind of thing does come up. So I think what landlords or property owners will start to grapple with is looking at these interventions as a way of mitigating their risks and protecting the value of their properties, as opposed to, is this going to increase revenue? If not, then let's not do it.
Sure. From a government or, even municipality side, are we seeing incentives or even more regulation? I know you touched on the 2025 deadline, but are we seeing more push towards sustainability?
The short answer is yes. The issue is always with implementation. So at a national level, we've got the Climate Change Act, which was passed last year, which sets up a lot of governance-related kind of requirements, including the fact that the Minister of Environmental Affairs can set carbon budgets. So they'll say, for example, this sector or this particular company that's classified as a high emitter may only emit up to, let's say, 500,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in a given year. The minister now has that power. Municipalities are interesting because the 5 major metros, this is all public information: City of Johannesburg, City of Cape Town, City of Ekurhuleni, City of Tshwane, City of eThekwini. They have made their own global commitments to what is known as the C40 Cities Initiative. C40, right? Like I said, all of this publicly available, guys. Publicly available. I'm not telling you things
You're not thinking it up.
that only the Wizard of Oz knows. So they've committed, and in terms of this global commitment, by 2030, all buildings within those metros all new builds rather from 2030 onwards must achieve net zero carbon.
Their own or everyone?
Building? It's for everyone. Must achieve net zero carbon by 2030, and all existing 2030. Yes, as in 5 years from now. And then all existing builds, all the current buildings, including this one, must achieve net zero carbon by 2050.
Wow.
And so what you find is some of them, like the city of eThekwini, it's a very interesting case, but the city of eThekwini has a green building incentive policy. It's there, it's on the website.
Okay.
You don't believe me? Go check it out.
Yeah.
And in terms of that, it says if your building has got a green star rating or some kind of green building rating that it's recognized, you can get up to a 40% rebate on your annual rates for that building. So the potential for incentives are there. The difficulty, however, like so many other things in local government, is with implementation. But I do think that over time, we will start seeing more focus on making sure that new buildings, especially in the next 5 years, do reach those net zero carbon standards. So if effectively their net carbon emissions are at zero. On the converse, a lot of them, these municipalities, other than City of Cape Town, they're running a wheeling pilot at the moment, but they will not allow wheeling, wheeling is the transfer of renewable energy using an electricity distribution network owned or operated by that municipality from one earth to another earth. Okay. So it's from one property to another property. So if you go from one ESCOM controlled site to another ESCOM controlled site, that is possible. ESCOM is actually very open to wheeling, interestingly. But a lot of the municipalities at this moment do not allow that. And there's been a lot of lobbying from the property sector to try and get the municipalities, especially the major metros, to soften their stance and allow this. Why? Because even the property companies that are now on the ESG journey and they want to do the right thing, they know that they cannot upscale their efforts unless they have access to off-site renewable energy. And the only way that they can do that at any real scale is to get the municipalities to cooperate.
Okay. So to that student who is studying, towards a property qualification or any other qualification for that matter, and they are passionate about sustainability, what would you advise them if they want to actually build a career in this field?
Look, if they want to study a sustainability-related qualification, I'm not going to be the one to stop them. But when you're in corporate, I've been in multiple different types of corporate environments, nothing beats putting your hand up. You don't need to have 9 degrees to just put your hand up and say, oh, I'd really like to get involved in sustainability related efforts at the organization. Because business leaders notice that. Especially, and I think a lot of business leaders in the sector are in this position. They've heard the noises and they know that sustainability is a thing that they need to do, right? But they do not have the time, the resources, or the wherewithal to now start finding sustainability, like really qualified sustainability people and building a team and briefing them. They don't have time for that. So for them, for someone, irrespective of their seniority, who just puts their hand up and says, you know what, I don't know everything when it comes to ESG and real estate, but I'm willing to learn. I think they'll take that very seriously. Okay. And that is more valuable than any degree you can get from any institution in the world.
So how do you keep up with the latest trends and regulations?
Oh, I'm in everybody's Kool-Aid. I'm in everybody's Kool-Aid. Oh, boy. So I am a board member on the Green Building Council of South Africa. That kind of helps me keep abreast of global and local trends in sustainability. I also follow news from, organizations such as obviously the SA REIT Association, the World Green Building Council is quite important. And let me put it to you this way. I think it also depends, or your news sources depend on how much you know about sustainability.
Sure.
So what I mean by that is you can, for example, keep track of stuff from the United Nations Global Compact. Brilliant organization. Fun fact, the United Nations Global Compact, it is run by the United Nations. It has 10 principles of sustainability, right? Okay. Any company in the Companies Act of South Africa, that is required to have a social and ethics committee, has to monitor its progress against those 10 principles. So the UN Global Compact is actually in South African company law legislation. Company secretaries, please just take a note of that. You might want to. So keeping abreast by keeping in touch with those kinds of organizations. I think if you're starting out, you can look towards kind of very general ESG related news, whatever you can get your hands on. UN Global Compact is very reliable. World Green Building Council, incredibly reliable. They are the global standard setter. RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, they are the ones who the valuers and the valuation companies deal with quite a lot. Brilliant, market leading, detailed guidance on how you can incorporate ESG into real estate. Brilliant, world class. They are really, really good. So you guys should set up feeds just to make sure that you're keeping up with news that's coming out of there as well. And I think as you then go on in your journey, you learn more about sustainability. You can weed out some of the generic kind of news and focus on those very real estate specific sources. Even when it comes to conferences, and I hope I don't get myself into too much trouble with this one. But I'm sure you've seen on LinkedIn, there are plenty of ESG conferences that pop up every 2 minutes. You can go to them, but there's only so many conferences you can attend in a year, realistically. I turned down quite a bit myself. Focus on the ones that deal with ESG in real estate. That is where you're going to find insights that you can actually use in your real life. A lot of the other conferences, because they're so generic and they're aimed at everyone and everything, you go there, you eat the fancy finger foods, you listen to these very generic presentations that say social is really important, and you're like, yeah, thanks, Dr. Phil, I was aware of that. Let's
but it doesn't really change your life. So which industries are leading in sustainability that you think have got practices that the built could actually learn from?
Retail. It's got some very useful insights, I think, that the sector could learn from. And I think that the sector should pay more attention to what the retail related ESG trends are, because those will be the ones that are adopted by some of your biggest tenants. So retail is very interesting. Mining, there's a lot that happens there, but mining is also a highly regulated environment. They've got a lot of environmental and social related risks. But retail is pretty good. But also just look at the actual property sector. There are companies locally and globally who are doing amazing work in the sustainability space, and that you can learn a lot from, even if it's just about proof of concept. I think the other problem sometimes with the local real estate sector is that the market leaders will tell you about their achievements, but they won't tell you details about the very slow and iterative process it took to get there. And that's the thing actually that the sector needs. The sector doesn't need to hear the story about, well, I guess they have to, because you have to brag about your achievements, So they need to hear this. They don't necessarily need to hear the story about, this great big market leading achievement and it's the first of its kind, this and the third. What would be useful is, who even decided to start on this thing? How did you get buy-in? Who did you consult with? Why did you choose that consultant, not another consultant? What were the challenges you ran into? How did you manage the data burden? How did you manage your deadlines? When you got the results, who did you feed them back to? Who did you get sign off from? Those are the things that I think the sector could really benefit from, as opposed to, the big end headline in flashing lights saying that, we're better than all y'all. We know that you're better than everybody else. What do we need to know how you did it?
But that's what we do. I think a lot of the times in life we talk about the destination, or this moment, but we don't talk about the journey. The falling and the getting back up, and those lessons,
and the blood, sweat, and tears.
And there's actual value in that. Okay, now the last question. It comes from the guest we hosted prior. And it goes, if you could have a message on a billboard for the world to see, what would the message read and why?
I think it would read, you have to start somewhere. I would say you have to start somewhere. Because when it comes to sustainability, you know what happens? I think even for the companies that mean well, they will see with what their competitors are doing on the other side of the fence. Yeah. And remember what I said, that they see the big headline, they don't see the work that went into it. So they see the big headline and then they almost set this unrealistic expectation in their heads.
Becomes overwhelming.
Yes.
Unachievable.
Yes. It either becomes unachievable or it becomes this thing of, okay, well, let's say my building needs to be Green Star rated. But if my building can't be a 6-star rated building, I'm not even going to bother. I'm not even going to bother because look at my competitor. They've got 6-star rated buildings. It's like, you have to start somewhere. If your competitor's building is 6-star rated and your building is 3-star rated, which is respectable, right? Your building is 3-star rated, it's okay. Just improve from there. But don't almost refuse to go anywhere because you're like, if I can't immediately beat my competitor, then I'm not even going to try. You have to start somewhere.
Brilliant. There we have it. That was Anelisa Keke. And I really enjoyed that conversation.
Thank you very much.
I think there's so much that I learned, and I am sure that if you stuck with us, you will have learned quite a bit yourself. So yes, thank you for joining us and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to the listeners.